I want people to feel like I created a space for many different voices. I am so unapologetic about saying this is what I want my legacy to be. If I can't be super proud of it and feel like I am helping others in the pursuit of a fulfilling career, then I don't know what I'm here for.
Welcome to A Success of Our Own. A success of our own is an invitation for us to courageously define our own version of success beyond the mainstream metrics we've been told we should want, so that we can create a sustainable and joyful success that we can finally relax into. I'm your host, Natalie Ruskin. I'm a journalist with an inquiring mind, a meditation teacher seeking the divine, and a community gatherer helping others live life more inspired. This podcast offers you the opportunity to learn and grow through inspiring personal stories of transformation, ideas, and practices. As you listen to this podcast, breathe it in and let it slow you down even a bit. Trust that simply listening in this less effortful way, you'll experience a shift. You'll find that puzzle piece you've been seeking. Join me in this moment, and let's take a risk together at living a success of our own. There are few women I know who fully own who they are in the all-in kind of way that Garvia Bailey does. She is a multi-award-winning journalist and was an on-air host, producer, and columnist for the CBC and Jazz FM. Most recently, Garvia co-founded Media Girlfriends, a production company which aims to amplify underrepresented voices in media. Garvia fully embodies all of her parts beyond the shoulds of what her industry or others want her to be. This art of owning it, and it really is an art, has been a real journey for Garvia.
You know, when you're in media like that, it can be really easy for your full self to not be recognized. People want a portion of that self. It's very easy to lose yourself and then be afraid that if you lean into something other than what people are expecting and wanting, if you lean into that too much, it's very easy to lose yourself.
She's going to share with us how she navigated away from the shoulds and towards what was uniquely hers to own. But first, a memory. When Garvia responded with an enthusiastic yes to coming on the podcast, it brought me right back to that warm and welcoming feeling I had when I first met this powerhouse of a human. Nearly 20 years ago, when I first entered the CBC Toronto building as a very nervous intern for the local radio show, Garvia was there, taking up space in the bold and beautiful way that she so effortlessly does. Up until that point, CBC Radio was the steady sound amplified through all rooms of my Toronto childhood home, the veritable high church of Canadian culture. And now I was inside the CBC, this massive and daunting physical edifice of my childhood broadcasting heroes. Seriously, the imposter syndrome for me in those early CBC days was deafening. So in my first week as an intern, I get to meet the Garvia Bailey. Statuesque, beautiful big smile, and bold. Also Black, the only Black woman I remember meeting and seeing in the entire CBC radio world at that time, and one of maybe 5 people of color amidst a sea of whites. In that very first encounter, Garvia took me under her proverbial wing with a generous, "You got this" kind of expression. In that very first moment, she got me. She sensed the deer in headlights situation happening. And every time we saw each other thereafter, she'd check in with me in a big sister kind of way.
I always felt like at the CBC that I was in it, but not necessarily of it. Just made me hyper aware that other people kind of perhaps were feeling that same way. When I see something like that, like, I just feel like, "Oh, I wanna reach out to that person."
Garvia went on to become a change maker for inclusivity and innovative programming within the sounds and spaces of Canada's media world. Yet, even back in 2004, as one of the only Black women at the CBC, Garvia sensed in me that longing to belong. Today, I have the gift to ask the trailblazer and bona fide broadcaster, Garvia Bailey, about her journey of belonging and re envisioning a success of her own. Garvia, this feels like a total lifetime moment to have you on my podcast and I get to interview you.
Stop. Stop.
Seriously. I remember I've told you, I remember my early days. I was an intern at the CBC. I couldn't my breathing was like very shallow because I was so nervous and in awe of where I was. And you right away just showed up with such love and inclusiveness every day, checking in, how's it going? And such a great energy. And that just always stayed with me. And
I feel like you were always a face that I loved to see in that building, even though we didn't get a chance to work together. I did feel that true connection, and I think it has a lot to do with, that feeling. I always felt like at the CBC that I was in it, but not necessarily of it. And so I
mm,
think that maybe it just made me hyper aware that other people kind of perhaps were feeling that same way, like a little bit overwhelmed by the whole thing and unsure. When I see something like that, like, I don't know, maybe it's some motherly instinct or whatever. I
mm.
just feel like, "Oh, I wanna reach out to that person because they feel like me."
It was like this arm around me, like, I got
Oh.
you. We're good. I see you. Yeah, thank you. The in it versus of it, is that something you've been paying attention to more and more since those early years at the CBC?
I think that that is just a protective mechanism that I've always had, and other than the job that I find myself in now, in having our own company, up until then, I think that it became a very important part of my tool chest, like my self-preservation tool chest, to go into an organization like the CBC that I know is massive, that didn't feel quite right to me in all of the ways that young journalists, marginalized folks were
Mhm.
feeling in this space. Like, I wasn't always sure. I think it's a part of my self-preservation toolkit to enter into a place and not give all of
Mhm.
my skills, but not give over to whatever that culture is that makes it very hard to see yourself clearly. I think that as soon as you get into the "I am of this place now," that's when you kind of lose that objectivity that you need to survive and to be really good to yourself.
Mhm.
When you're in a culture, and CBC is very much a culture, right? Like, it's
Mhm.
a cultural thing. And once you are deep into the culture, it can be sometimes hard to critique that culture.
And hard to have discernment around
Yeah.
your own choices and your own values because it can be very I know for me, it was 12 hours a day. It completely swallowed me up and
Mhm.
impacted me in really wonderful ways and then in ways that I absolutely lost myself.
Same. Same.
When you were there, I was thinking about this yesterday. You, Nikki Davis, like there was this one
Mhm.
guy in training. You know where I'm going with this. Like you were like the three, there were other people of color, but you were the three Black people I knew on that whole, like, I think it was the third floor, fourth floor. They
That's
kept
right.
changing it.
That's right. 3 and 4. That's right.
What was it when you coming back to that interesting phrase of in it versus of it? Can you, for me, who I just was, of the majority, was there an awareness of being one of the onlys at that time? And what did that feel like for you?
Yeah, what actually brought me to the CBC was definitely feeling like voices like my own, young Black women.
Mm.
I wasn't hearing a lot of it. I was listening to a lot of the CBC, but I really felt like there was many perspectives that were missing. So when I started working there, it was always with that, like even reaching out to the CBC, the program was Out Front at the time, personal storytelling
Mhm.
program. So even reaching out to them, I was like, I would like to hear more voices like my own. Out Front was a place where I could do that. And then when I started working there, that was the first thing I wanted to do was bring in more voices like my own into the mix. And that was one of my first major projects. But the trap door is feeling like you are painted into a certain box, that you are supposed to be a certain thing, although you want to bring perspective of, a Black female's perspective to it. That means many things. There is no one
Mm.
monolithic Black female
Mhm.
perspective. So there was that. And then, as the only person of color on a floor, or one of just a couple, as you pointed out, it just felt like it would be easy to be painted into a certain square and then not be able to really exercise the full scope of who you are, And I feel
Mm.
like I contain multitudes, as we
Mm.
all do. I grew up in a really small town. I know more about, buck and does and
I
tractor
have no idea
pulls.
what you just said.
Exactly what I'm saying. But as a Black woman, if I bring that perspective to the table, people are like, "What? That's not supposed to be your lane."
Right,
And I was like,
right.
but it totally is my lane because that's my reality. So there was always like that fear, like walking in those spaces. Whenever you walk into a
Mm.
majority white space and you're seen as only or other, you do have to be very careful for yourself, is what I mean. Like,
Mhm.
and media is funny. Like being in journalism spaces is funny. It's easy to have. You're meant to have a beat, right? Like
Mm.
you cover this and you cover that. But when a perceived
Mm.
notion of your identity becomes your beat, that can be pretty limiting, and it can be pretty hard on your spirit, you
Did
know?
did you find that happened to you? And I'm not asking this, of course, from a kind of judgmental place, but how much do you think the perpetuating, if that did happen, came from your own fear of I'm supposed to be, this is what they want from me. I should be this way. This is how
Yeah.
will get me success. Ha-
Yes.
Mm.
Yes, because other people start to define what success looks like to you, right? Like what your success is. And because we're in media, and because in my role in media at the time, I was very public, right? So I was
Mhm.
on the air, I was on television, I was all those things. And people were telling me, "Oh yeah, we love the way you do X, Y, and Z. Do more of
Mhm.
that. Be more of this person." And I'll be honest, like now that I look back at it, that person was an aspect of me, but it
Mm.
wasn't my fullness. When you're in media like that, it can be really easy for your full self to not be recognized. People want
Mhm.
a portion of that self to be out in the world. And it's very easy to lose yourself and then be afraid that if you lean into something other than what people are expecting and wanting, and really like goading you in, telling you that like that's
Mhm.
success, if you lean into that too much, it's very easy to lose yourself.
Can you remember at all, even on a physiological level, what did it feel like for you to have that disconnect at that time?
I think success can be a real trap,
Mm.
because I felt like I was doing really well in my
Mhm.
job.
Mhm.
I was being told I was doing really well in my job. I'd be out at the grocery store and people would say, "Oh, I love
Mhm.
listening to you on the air.
Mhm.
You're so great and so wonderful," and all of that. But I think that as the years went by, as I grew as just a human being, I think it started to feel a little bit hollow. And I felt like, getting up in the morning and going into my job was starting to feel hard. And people will tell you, people have hard jobs. Like working is hard. Like it's not supposed to be amazing, but you're not supposed to cry in the shower. honestly, I don't know, Natalie, if I could just have in those moments, I could put
Right.
my finger on
Yeah.
exactly what the thing was, but I knew that there was something profoundly amiss.
When you say, people say jobs are hard and we almost have to equalize our comments
Mhm.
because we don't want to sound like we were being not grateful for what we had and that there aren't
Yes.
challenges. And you're a certain type of being, Garvia, which
Mm.
is you always were and you are more than ever very tuned in. Like we talked about, part of that connection that we had before we even could articulate it was there was this awareness of being tuned into what isn't being spoken. And some people might call that sensitivity. For some people, I'll say my husband, we'll see if he lets me keep this clip in, um, who works in an emergency room in the
Yeah.
busiest sector of this country. And he's been there for nearly 15 years. And he can just freaking go in there through COVID, everything, and just get through it. And he has this constitution where, I mean, COVID was brutal for everyone, but he can compartmentalize and he's
Mhm.
freaking brilliant when he's in this crisis. He just can handle all the stuff coming at him. And that's his zone of genius. And what I'm getting at is was was there also a piece, like a coming to in yourself of like, I'm different. Like forget about I'm different like from a race perspective, but I'm
Mhm.
different from a energetic constitution. I need a different kind of work experience to feel that I'm
Mhm.
honoring myself.
Mhm. Oh, that's such a good way of, sort of framing that. I have always have been a very sensitive being, sensitive to people's moods, sensitive to people's emotions, and I think that that's what made me good at my job,
Mm,
interviewing people and getting to the essence of someone's story. Those are the things that are strengths to me. But at the same time, working in the journalism sphere, those
mhm.
strengths could be seen as
Yep.
weaknesses, perhaps, or not as honored as and maybe what I really was starting to search for is a space that I could just honor the fullness of myself, you
Mhm.
know? As I got older and more inclined to think about my life holistically, I
Mhm.
think it became quite clear to me that I couldn't leave parts of myself, and that sensitivity piece is just so important. I couldn't leave parts of that behind. I couldn't, hide that little light under under a bushel.
Mhm.
My best friends that I have are from that
Mhm.
time, the people that are with me through it all now that, in my 90s, I will be with those people, come from that time and that place.
You kind of started a company with them, didn't you?
I kinda started a company with them and have found the place where
Mm.
I can be fully, completely
Mm.
myself and wake up in the morning and feel like, "Okay, we have hard things to do today, but even my hardest days are better than what my best days were
Mm.
at other jobs," you know? So, getting up and knowing that the fullness of who I am, that I can go to my coworkers now and my co-founders and say, "You know what, y'all? This is what's bothering me right now, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you that my sensitive heart
Mhm.
is feeling
Mhm.
like X, Y, and Z is happening, or my sensitive intuition is
Mhm.
saying that going down this path is not the path we wanna
Oh my god,
go
could you
down."
imagine saying that in a story
Right?
meeting at
Right?
CBC?
"Guys, intuitively, I'm feeling like" you know what I mean? Like, you would be laughed out
Ugh.
of the
Oh
building,
my
and
gosh.
in a way, I kinda laughed myself out of the building
Mm.
in that if I couldn't have those conversations, I don't know why I was there.
Mm.
I couldn't go, another 20 years doing that.
I wanna hear about the company and the work you're doing in a moment.
Yes.
I wanna stay for one more thought here with that turning point for you where there was this kind of real taking care of yourself and setting that limit. For people who might be listening and thinking, yeah, I mean, I kind of relate, but how do I know when it's time to cut ties?
Yeah. Well, I guess it's a twofold question. So the CBC, I knew when to cut ties when I felt like it kind of prepared me for the bigger cutting of
Mhm.
ties to media writ large, like the legacy media companies or working for someone else or
Mm.
working in a space that wasn't healthy. First, it was the cutting ties with CBC, which meant like cutting ties with a version of myself that had been built over many, many years, close to a
Mhm.
decade, and being okay with that and saying, I don't need to be a spokesperson or speaking to my ego and just letting
Mhm.
that go. That
Mhm.
was one part of it. So I don't know if that was reaching bottom or actually reaching a little bit higher, elevating myself to the point where my ego wasn't the thing that was being fed, it was something else. And the person that I was bringing home to my family was not a happy person. So
Mhm.
once that kind of clicked in for me, great. Then when I started my job with Jazz FM, and things started going sideways there when I realized that there was a lot of toxicity in that environment and became sort of the spokesperson for
Mm.
calling that out. And it became very apparent that this was going to be the hardest situation that I was going to find myself in. Like it was going to be the toughest part of my professional life
Hmm.
was pushing back against an organization that thought that there was absolutely nothing wrong when it was quite obvious that they were actually doing a lot of harm to a lot of individuals. And, you know, being the person to step up and speak truth to power is also something that, is as much a part of my sensitive DNA as a sensitivity. It's a part of who I need to be. I think they're interconnected. I could not watch other people suffer, and then I couldn't watch myself suffer under that kind of work environment. It's work, it's getting a paycheck. It's
Mhm.
not above being called out. That was a very hard time, and I did end up litigating, and that all got worked out in the mix as time passed. But I'll tell you, Natalie, I have never been so low.
Mm.
I have never been so battered and bruised and on the edge as I was during that time. I was being told that it was me,
Of course. Of
you know,
course. The
that
gaslighting.
all of this was happening because I was bad at my
Ugh.
job. Like, in what universe, y'all? Like, and there was times when that narrative was being pushed out in the public sphere.
Mhm. Mhm. When you brought back in the sensitivity piece, I had chills because the word that kept coming to mind for me is strength. What strength it takes
Yeah.
to speak up when everybody else just says, "Well, this is work. You just do this." The very thing that maybe at times at the CBC felt like, "Oh, why do I have this thing that makes me feel like I'm weak and I can't just." I mean, maybe I'm projecting and this was my own perspective at the CBC, but the very thing that could have been perceived as weak was such a strength for you,
Mhm.
not without some collateral damage to your
Yes.
being. What allowed you to, in the kind of face of that, supported you to stay true to that knowing in yourself that there's something that is just, this is not okay?
You know what? I was the only one that got litigious with it,
Mm.
but there were other people in the background that were like, "Yeah, you're absolutely right." People that left the organization as well, people that I started a small, independent online radio station with, Jazzcast.
Mhm, I remember that.
Danny and Walter were just wonderful, wonderful people that were from that time that really supported me and understood that what I was pushing against was right and true and just. And I think a lot of people understood that. The other thing that really helped is that by that time I was like, I don't give a shit. I know
Mm.
that as hard as this is, I am right.
Mm.
I am 100% right.
Mhm.
And that really floated my boat during that time as well. And I have a great partner. My partner was like, in Braveheart, I think it is, when Mel's character says, "On my mark, unleash hell," or something like that. And then
Mm.
the dog goes and the dog's name is Hell. Like, my mom is the strongest person that you will ever meet. She came to this country as an immigrant. She came on her own.
Hmm.
She left me as a baby behind and my brothers and sisters, and came to Canada as a lone person to work as a domestic worker. And she stayed here and she did the work, and she dealt with all the slings and arrows. And she always just said to me, if not now, when? That was when I was changing jobs from the CBC. And then the other part of it was when I was standing up for things at the next job at Jazz FM. She was like, if not you, who? And I was like,
Oh,
okay,
shit.
okay, Eva, whatever. Like your own mom calling you out, like, this is who you
Wow.
are. Like my mother named me after Marcus Garvey. You know, he is the one that inspired, Martin Luther King
Oh my God.
and Malcolm X, and all of those civil rights leaders came out of the teachings of Marcus Garvey. So my mom was like serious about this business. If you are going to stand up for yourself and your workmates, go all in. So all of those things really made it possible for me to stand through it. And I would say that I am still dealing with it on a personal level, but this past year has been the most fulfilling and wonderful time for me, because I feel like all of that is so much in the rearview mirror, and I'm reaping all of the rewards of what came before.
And of those qualities that you so courageously embodied that were factory installed through the naming and the
Yes.
pedigree, and we're there and ready to kind of take root
Yeah.
when the time was right. We talked about this
Mhm.
beautiful company you've created. How have those experiences with work and the parts that felt not of you, how
Mhm.
have those pieces shaped what you've created now? And by the way, what is this thing
Yes.
that you've created?
Well, we've created a media company. I've created a media company with my two partners and besties. Hannah Sung, who is a award-winning journalist in print, in television. She's just wonderful. She's my production partner. And Nanaba Duncan, who was formerly at CBC, who's now a professor in the Carty Chair of Journalism and Inclusion at Carleton University. We started a company called Media Girlfriends that came out of Nanaba having started a really excellent sort of media networking support group for women like us that were in the media and having very similar experiences, and deciding to be there for each other, advice, commiseration, you know, drinks, like a mate to go to events with, support system, all of those things. And out of that came a scholarship that we've given away, $80,000 so far. And then out of that came this company that we are producers. We produce great journalism. We do it with care and with compassion and with an eye to trauma informed ways and approaches. We do it with intentionality, with excellence in how we do the journalism, but also with an eye to making sure that the how we're doing it is being addressed as well. And the partnerships that we enter into are the right partnerships. And because we own something, because it's ours, because we are the ones where the buck stops, we can say yes and no to things in a way that is so freeing and so wonderful. So Media Girlfriends is a production company where we do podcasts, but we also do, workshops, and we're doing television production, and we're doing video production and writing, educating. We're doing all kinds of stuff. We're doing the things that are so intentional and so heart filling, doing the hard work of creating stuff, but also doing it with an eye towards feeling as fulfilled. Like every day I wake up and say, how will we fulfill one another's ambitions and joys and personal goals today? Like I think we all wake up asking ourselves that question and finding a way to answer it. So it's just great.
Well, you've designed the very ofness that you always
Yes.
felt you didn't have.
Yeah, and I think it's like it's easy to talk about what you don't want, in a job or in your work, it's a little bit harder to say, what do you want it to be, though?
Mhm.
It's a little more intentional to say,
Mhm.
this is what I want to create. And I think the fact that Hannah, Nanaba, and myself really sat down together and said, but what is it that we want? We already know what we don't want. What is it we wanna create, and what does legacy look like?
Mm.
What do we wanna leave behind? What do we want people to talk about when they talk about Media Girlfriends and talk about us as individuals?
What do you want them to talk about?
I want people to feel like I created a space for many different voices. I wanna feel like I gave a space for stories that are important, that make us bigger, more empathetic, more loving, and a more just and equitable sort of society. I know these are all big kind of
Mm.
ideas,
Own
but
it.
at the end of the day, I am so unapologetic about
Mhm.
saying this is what I want my legacy to be. I was just listening to the poet laureate for Toronto was talking at the Walrus Gala recently, and he talked about at the end of one's life, you see these 2 dates, the beginning of your life and then the end date, and it's what you do in the dash that is the most important. It's that dash that we should be concentrating
Mm.
on, not the end date and not that start date. This is my work. This is who I am. This
Mhm.
is the thing that I spent most of my time doing. And if I can't be super proud of it and feel like I am helping others in the pursuit of a fulfilling career, then I don't know what I'm here for, really. Like,
We hear about this idea of being of maximum service,
mhm,
being a vessel for that kind of most expansive change and hope. And that's
mhm,
what I hear you talking about is there's a real higher purpose. There's a merit for you to be using those when you were like, these are big words or lofty kind of goals. And yet you are so clearly coming from a higher place. What I love hearing is that it's easeful. Could you speak to how you define your own version of success today? How do you evaluate that for yourself? Because clearly those metrics have changed since your earlier
mhm.
days in this industry.
Success can be 2 things. It can be an outwardly idea, but it can also be an inwardly idea. And I do think that marrying the 2 and thinking about how those 2 speak to each other, like my inner self and my outward persona, I needed them to be at peace with each other.
Mhm.
And success to me means that what I'm putting out into the world lines up with where I internally feel like I should be.
Mm.
And when those 2 things diverge is when I feel like I have not been successful. And it's weird because those things could diverge and outwardly I look very successful.
Mhm.
You know, I'm, collecting awards and people are talking about me and, people know my voice and know my name. That could be success. But if inside I'm like, "What are you doing?" Like, if in my darkest hours when nobody sees me and I'm just, like, in my bathroom or in my room sitting on my bed, am I
Mhm.
really at peace? If these 2 things are married, then when I walk into my house and I'm here with my partner and I'm dealing with my mom and dad and my brothers and sisters and my daughter and if all these things are working together well, then I'm not bringing any harsh vibes into my personal life, And that's what that's what success looks like to me. Like, I just don't wanna bring the harsh vibes of what work can be into my home life and into the parts of my life that really actually matter. I'm doing work to me right now that I think is important and I think it's impactful. I really do feel like we are liveling up and truthifying and being a part of the media landscape that I think needs the most care right now. I think that we're a part of that care package, Media
Mm.
Girlfriends is. I really do. When I come home, I'm at like a happy, it makes it easier to be a fulsome
Mhm.
person. So success to me is two things, and I need those two things to speak to each other. The outward thing where people are like, "Hey, what's Garvia Bailey doing? Oh, she's doing this, 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 and this. That's cool."
Mhm. Mhm.
And inside I'm like, "Hey, what's Garvia Bailey doing? I'm doing this, 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 and this. Cool." If it can all work together, I'm good.
What are some of the practices or structures that keep you in this congruity between the outer
Mm.
and the inner self?
Really being okay with examining myself all the time, like doing the full gut check and honoring that. For some people, it's therapy. For others, it's group chats, just checking in with yourself all the time to make sure that those things that you've been fine tuning all this time are still,
Mhm.
well oiled. The idea of giving yourself a lot of grace, being okay with those things that need to be fine tuned, being okay with saying, I know that that needs to be fine tuned and I'm going to
Mm.
do the work to do it.
Mhm.
Not always easy to live up to your own expectations of yourself. Giving yourself that grace, knowing that grace has been such an important part of this
Mhm.
journey for me. I love the people that I've surrounded myself with. My mother is a best friend that she'd had for 40 plus odd years, one of the first really good friends in Canada. And I said, "How are things with, your friend?" And she said, "Oh, good. I had her over the other day." And I said, "Oh, that's nice." She said, "Oh, yeah, we had some tea in the backyard." And I said, "Oh, that sounds really nice." And she said, "Yeah, I brought her tea." And then I sat down and I said, "I release you." And I was like, "What?
Whoa.
Wait a second. Where's this story going? What do you mean?" And she said, I needed to release her of the responsibilities of our friendship
Mm.
because it wasn't working for us at that time.
Wow. That
I was
is
like, "Woman, what?"
wow.
And she said, "Yeah." I said, "I release you." And she said she wasn't sure what that meant. And they didn't speak really for a few years after that. They came back together as friends after, but in that moment, I think my mother was saying that the things that she needed out of the relationship, she wasn't getting, and the things that she was able to give to the relationship, she wasn't giving.
Mm.
So in that moment, no one was winning in that relationship. And so every time we put ourselves out with someone, like, it's energy that could be going somewhere else.
Mm.
So I gotta tell you, Natalie, I came back to Toronto and I started releasing people. I was like, we are not feeding each other in a
Wow.
good way. We are not loving each other in a way friends love each other. So why are we continuing this farce?
That is next level.
Next level and intentional. You know what I mean? Like doing it not like in a shady way, not just
Mhm.
ghosting someone, bringing someone to you, because this intentionality is a big thing. Bringing someone to you and saying, I love you. I think that you're a wonderful person. Our relationship is not feeding either of us right now. Let's put it on the back burner.
Instead of it taking up so much bandwidth operating system in the back of your kind of
Yeah,
proverbial computer window.
exactly. Running the
Yeah,
whole
the
time.
fan's on, it's
The fan is
overheating.
on the whole time. It's overheating. Nothing else can open or work well
Mm.
because you're just running this thing in the background
That's so radical.
that is not good. So I said to myself, Garvia, you have to start releasing people. And doing that has led me to this place where I have this great company with these great people.
Mhm.
I have a tight friend support group. I
Mhm.
love it. I it's not like I don't go outside of it and I don't love the people and appreciate the people that are outside of my tight core group, but my energy
Mhm.
is not infinite.
Mhm, mhm. Oh my
So
gosh.
I kind of look at it that way. And so I don't know. I think maybe a lot of people might look at that and be like, "Oh my gosh." But isn't there like some kind of like study that says that we only have the capacity to have like 100 friends or something?
I thought you were gonna say 5, but I think that's more we're the result of the 5 people we spend our time
Yes.
with.
Exactly.
I
So I'm about the 5. I don't even think I have 100 people in my
mm,
phone right now.
Before we go, I try to do something vulnerable on every,
Oh,
episode
I
as a
love
way.
vulnerability. It's such a strength, dude.
What came to mind was when you talked about giving yourself grace in one area, and I thought we could both share one area that we are working on bringing
Mm.
grace for ourselves, and I can go first if you want.
Okay, you go first.
So for me, this is very vulnerable. I'm working on a forgiveness statement every day,
Mm.
and it's I forgive myself for judging myself as a financial failure. For my
Oh.
new truth is that I
Mhm.
am showing up to contribute to those I love and what I love. Through the pandemic, really struggled with feeling like I was a financial failure, and I discounted all the ways that I was contributing non-financially.
Oh, my
But
love.
it's still something that is a vice grip that I wake up with, and I feel it physiologically every day, so it's a daily practice for me.
Oh, man, I feel that so much. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for
That's
receiving it.
that's very vulnerable and raw, and I love it, and I could probably co-sign on that one and just say, "Ditto."
I right? I feel like
Samesies.
I need to share that because otherwise, what the fuck am I doing here with this podcast? Like, I
Exactly.
don't wanna be wearing a mask. As I say that, I'm like, "Oh, that's 10 potential clients leaving the room." But
No,
yeah.
yeah. But then there's 10 more that have their eyes and hearts open to it, right?
Mhm.
So, I just went out to breakfast with my production partner, Hannah, and 2 folks that we work with closely, and we talked about food a lot, going through the stress of the pandemic, going through the stress of being in a litigation with people, and then, menopause and all that.
Mhm.
I've really had to be gracious with myself around my body and just being like, this thing has taken me through so much. I have been at certain times good to it and just awful
Mhm.
to my own body. And I have to look at it and be gracious with myself and just be like, I love this vessel. Like, I really, really do. And again, it goes back to that outward thing, like where your ego is like, well, Garvia, you have gained
Mm,
blah, 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 and you
I
don't fit
know
into
that
that
voice.
anymore. I'm just like, dude, of course I don't fit into that anymore. I'm not 22. Like, what?
Oh,
Like, give yourself a
oh
break.
my gosh.
Let us
Yes.
have some grace around it. Let me look at myself and just feel really beautiful in the person that I am, you know? Because I'll tell you
Yes.
something, my 22-year-old self was smoking hot by conventional standards, but her inner self was
Mm,
wilting and
mm,
ugly and
mhm,
unhappy. I really, right now, am really wanting to honor my body in being healthy,
mhm,
certainly, but not being so hung up
mhm,
on the other things that
mhm.
society would have me think are lacking.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Oh, I know it. We have to offline this convo because this is a whole other convo. And yeah, the body, food, exercise
Oh,
obsession for me has been a lifelong journey, and you are preaching to the choir.
yeah, man. We gotta give this vessel, this thing that we only have it for a short time, you
Mhm.
know? We only get it for a short time.
Care
So
package to the body.
care package to the body. Natalie, yes.
Garvia, how can we give grace to you? Tell us how we can find you and follow you.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you can always check out what we do at mediagirlfriends.com and find out who we are. We're just a lovable group of gals. You can find me on, Twitter if you're still in that place. I'm Garvey's Child there. I'm Garvia B on Instagram. You can always just email me at garvia@mediagirlfriends.com if you want to learn more about my story. This year I'll be off for a while, so I won't be doing a lot of producing. I'm doing a Massey fellowship,
Yay.
thinking and
Amazing.
talking and thinking a lot and reading a lot and going back to kind of learning a lot, which is really exciting. So actually this year is probably, if you just want to chat with me, it's probably a good time because I'll
Be
have
careful what you ask for.
I know,
you
right?
You might be released, by the way, if you reach out to Garvia in an ungraceful way. She may release you.
I'll take you to tea, but I will release you. I'm sorry.
You are truly an inspiration to me. It's such a privilege to speak with you in this way.
Well, thank you so much for having this platform and just inviting me, because I feel so honored to be invited to be on this podcast with you. I think that you're just a light, and whenever your name pops up, I'm like, okay, I'm going to be dealing with a light being today. Fantastic. Let's go.
I receive that. Thank you. Okay, so you've heard the conversation. Now what? I got you. I'm here. I'm here to support you beyond just the episode. So check out my website. I've got some practical guides and worksheets. Yep, there's worksheets there to help you create some of the changes you want to see in your life. You can find all of that at natalieruskin.com. That's natalieruskin.com. I want this podcast to be successful. And on the topic of success, one of my metrics of success is to share this message with those who may benefit most from hearing it. So if you feel inspired by what you've heard here, like it. Or if a friend or colleague comes to mind, share it with them. And I'd love to hear from you. What topics, what themes around success would you like to hear more on? Send me a note. I'm at Natalie@natalieruskin.com.